I wanted to speak for a few minutes on elements of a conservative outlook. There are many different kinds of conservatives. They will disagree with one another on many points, but I think most conservatives would agree with the points that are made here. And we are speaking about an approach to life. We're not speaking about specific policies. And John Keeks, a philosopher, writes about a frame of mind, a flow of sympathy, a disposition to view matters in a certain light. And so that's what we're talking about, the approach to the world that we recognize as conservative. And a source of conservatism, Keeks says, is a natural attitude that combines the enjoyment of something valued with the fear of losing it. So, for example, we value the prosperity and the liberty that we enjoy in the United States. Not only conservatives worry about losing that, but conservatives do worry about losing the liberty and the prosperity that we have in this country, partly as a result of what seems to be obvious educational decline, as the graph shows here, that fewer than half of people with college degrees are able to read well, are able to read sophisticated material, and are able to account for what they have read. This is people with college degrees. And then we see that the United States has fallen far behind many other countries in especially math and science, but also reading. And so we notice here, for example, that our highest performing state, Massachusetts, is well behind the average of many other countries. And so conservatives worry that if this continues, then we're going to lose something. And so there is this element of anxiety about the future. We're going to lose something that has been important to us. Conservatives also take a dim view of progress, Keek says, and this doesn't mean that conservatives don't see obvious technological advances. Obviously, they see that. For example, even this video is something that could not have been made 20 years ago. And so conservatives obviously see this, but what they doubt is that there can be much progress insofar as human nature is concerned. And so the technology that we have grows more sophisticated, but human nature remains the same, and basic moral problems persist. And so we have families that sit around tables and they hold in their hands tremendous technology, and they're focusing on the technology, and they're focusing on messages, most of them not very important, or videos, most of them not very important, from far away, but they're ignoring one another. Conservatives worry about the moral consequences of this kind of thing. And conservatives can go to many serious writers and philosophers who have seen something similar. So Plato says even in people who appear to be perfectly self-restrained, there resides within them something wild and lawless. Julian of Norwich in 14th century England detects in people two general kinds of wills: an animal will, that there's this tendency to violence and self-destruction, but then there's also a godly will, this element of human nature that can cause us to do wonderful things, and these two wills are at war with one another. Shakespeare sees something similar. He has Hamlet talk about the amazing intellectual abilities that human beings possess, but yet he has Hamlet say at the same time, "Man delights not me." There's something wondrous about the human being. There's something self-destructive and self-defeating about the human being, and these things reside in all of us. St. Paul in the New Testament writes about wanting to do certain things but then doing the opposite, and not wanting to do certain things but then doing them. And St. Paul describes this battle within. We have the story at the very beginning of the Hebrew Scriptures, the book of Genesis, and we see that the two human beings placed in the Garden of Eden, there they are in paradise, and yet they still find a way to mess things up. And we see that a point of the story seems to be that it's not external institutional things that corrupt people. Of course, institutions can help to further the corruption of people, but that the corruption comes from within. It isn't really possible that institutions could be responsible for corrupting people, because institutions are created by people. And so if you have a corrupt institution, it's because of the people within the institution. And so conservatives see that there's something within human nature that we should be wary of, that we should be careful about. And so we have this idea that, or conservatives have this idea that they carry with them. And so for conservatives, the necessary work is to promote freedom. Yes, conservatives do talk about the importance of freedom and liberty, but given human nature, then we need to emphasize ordered freedom. We need to emphasize ordered liberty. In other words, we want to promote, or conservatives want to promote, the liberty that comes among people who are self-controlled, among people who are trustworthy, among people who are responsible. We enjoy this freedom, conservatives say, because we can trust one another. We can count on one another to be responsible. We can count on one another to be self-controlled. And so conservatives talk about liberty, but they talk about the importance of liberty that is ordered, liberty that is shaped by moral education. And so conservatives may quote, for example, St. Augustine, who says, "Love others and do what you will." If you love others, if you have the interests of others in your mind, or if you have in your mind the desire not to step on other people unnecessarily, not to abuse other people, not to put down other people, if you have a general disposition of charity toward others, and this isn't something that necessarily comes naturally, we have to learn it and practice it, but if we have that kind of disposition, and if we can trust that others have the same disposition, then we are free. Then we can operate freely because we basically trust one another. This is what makes for a free and prosperous society. Adam Smith says that every man, speaking about economics, every man or every person, as long as he does not violate the laws of justice, is left perfectly free to pursue his own interest in his own way. Notice the emphasis on justice again. But this is not a justice imposed from the outside, although obviously we need laws. This is a sense of justice that comes from the inside, but it's not something that necessarily comes naturally all by itself. We have to learn to be just. We have to learn to treat one another with respect. We have to learn and foster within ourselves dispositions of charity. But when we get good at that, and when our neighbors are good at that, when our children are good at that, when those in the community are good at that, when we are committed not to stepping on one another, when we are self-controlled, when we have a sense of personal responsibility within the community, then we are free to pursue our interests, because our interests won't be abusive. Our interest won't be in stepping on other people. Our interest will be in, of course, making good lives for ourselves, and also contributing to the community. This is the sort of thing that conservatives look for. And one of the things that helps us to stay on track, conservatives say, is preserving and promoting things that are tried and true. Good ideas that have stood the test of time. This doesn't mean all old ideas are worth keeping. Slavery is an old idea. Slavery has been normal for the majority of human history, and slavery has been global for the majority of human history. But this is an old idea that everyone rejects, or every rational person rejects. And so just because an idea is old does not mean it's valuable. But there are some ideas, there are some works of art, there are some books there are some ways of being, there are some political outlooks that have stood the test of time. And it's in our interest to preserve these things so that we can have ordered freedom, and therefore we can pursue good lives. And we have a quote here from the English writer C.S. Lewis, who talks about the importance of old books. And he doesn't mean that books are important just because they're old. He's talking about books that are old and that continue to be read and continue to inform people with, these books continue to give people useful ideas, useful approaches, useful ways of being. So the fact that something is old by itself doesn't make it important, but some things do stand the test of time, and so conservatives want to emphasize those kinds of things. Now, to speak for a moment about liberals, when political liberals feel discontented in a political sense, it seems that it often has to do with the fact that the world doesn't match up to an ideal they have in relation to the future. That liberals look for equality. And the liberal goal is a society that is, if not perfectly equal, as close to perfectly equal as possible. And so liberal discontent seems to be forward-looking. There's a future society we're after, a future of tremendous and near-perfect equality. And this is one of the things that I think that helps to explain the liberal impulse to reform, 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 reform. No matter how great the political success that liberals enjoy, there's always another reform right around the corner because there is a lot of inequality in the world. Conservative discontent, it seems to me, derives from the sense that what is happening today does not match up to some ideal that we locate in the past. A time when the United States was #1 in education insofar as science and mathematics was concerned. A time when the family was strong. A time when we felt that my children would have a better economy than I do, and conservatives feel like these things are being lost. Well, conservatives are not against reform, but usually they want to move slowly. And conservatives emphasize that as we reform things in our own society, and sometimes reform is necessary, we want to have an ongoing conversation with the past. We want to ask those who have come before us, so to speak, what they think about this reform. They haven't put this reform into effect. Why? Maybe they had some good ideas back there that we've lost. Maybe we should try to recapture some of their good ideas. In other cases, we realize, no, we have learned some things that they didn't know. And therefore, even though they would not approve of this reform, we're going to move forward anyway. But the conservative disposition is to slow things down. We're not opposed to reform, but we want to move forward in communication with the past. Tradition is important. Tradition is what made it possible to have this conversation in the first place. We don't want to be so arrogant as to think that we know everything. Let's talk to those who came before us. And then also conservatives want to emphasize the theme of consequences. If we do this today, this idea that seems so good today, if we want to do this today, what might the consequences be? Now, of course, we can't know the consequences. There are often unintended consequences to reforms. But insofar as we're able to think it through, what might the consequences of this reform be? And so conservatives, as they discuss reform, want to be in conversation with the past. And they also, so to speak, want to be in conversation with the future. And they want to slow things down so that our reform can be as thoughtful as possible. And so what then is the conservatives' hope? It is a fairly pessimistic or perhaps realistic view of human nature, we should say, that within each human being there is this struggle. It's an internal struggle. And that conservatives, not only conservatives, others see this, but conservatives see that there is something self-destructive and self-deceptive in human beings. But what do conservatives hope for? Well, they hope that people can pursue lives of liberty, that they can pursue excellence, that they can pursue worthwhile things that bring them happiness. Of course, that's the sort of society that they want. But these kind of societies don't happen magically. They happen as a result of work. And liberty all by itself can get us into trouble. Let's get a group of 8-year-old boys together and just have liberty with no order. Well, we know where that's going. Conservatives call for ordered liberty, a system of rules that at first may seem a little oppressive, perhaps. These rules may seem to hem us in, but the moral training that we gain, the self-control that we gain, the sense of responsibility that we gain actually frees us because we can trust one another. We trust one another's motivations. We trust one another's ambitions. We're not stepping on one another intentionally. And so, conservatives want lives that are full of liberty and that have the sense of enjoyment and pleasure that comes with the pursuit of excellent things. And the way to do this is to pay attention to the good things from tradition, to reform cautiously and thoughtfully, and to pass on to those who are young the great ideas that have stood the test of time. Okay, on that point, I'll say goodbye.